12 years of sweat, sacrifice, and loyalty, gone in a single meeting. Daniel Morrison built a crumbling construction firm into a multi-million-dollar powerhouse, only to be cast aside for the boss's entitled son. But as the company he built began to collapse under incompetence, Daniel made a quiet decision, one that would turn 12 years of construction firm into a most devastating comeback they never saw coming. Have you ever given everything to a job or someone only to be betrayed when it mattered most? Share your thoughts. Stories like these remind us how fragile trust can be. My name is Daniel Morrison. I'm 37 years old, and this is the story of how 12 years of loyalty were thrown away and how I built something stronger from the ruins. Daniel Morrison still remembered the first time he set foot on Donnelly Construction's dusty worksite. 12 years ago, he had been a broken man, his own contracting business swallowed by the recession, his confidence crushed under mounting debts. At 25, he had shown up with nothing but a worn-out tool belt, calloused hands, and a quiet determination to rebuild. Frank Donnelly, a rugged Irishman with gray hair and calloused hands, had given him a chance. "You work hard, you'll go places," Frank had told him that first day, watching Daniel swing a hammer with precision born from years of experience. Daniel took those words to heart. 6 months later, he was a crew chief. Within 2 years, he was managing entire projects. By year 3, Frank trusted him with client relationships, bidding processes, and the company's reputation itself. Daniel had turned Donnelly Construction from a modest 5-man crew into a thriving regional name. He introduced digital project management systems, established long-term partnerships with architects, and pioneered sustainable building practices in their market. The company grew to 30 employees, landing multi-million-dollar commercial projects. For Daniel, it wasn't just a job. It was his life. He worked 16-hour days, sacrificed weekends, and poured his soul into every foundation poured and every beam placed. Donnelly Construction became a second home, and its success felt personal, like something he had built with his own 2 hands. Then Tommy came back. Frank's son had always been in the background, a ghost more interested in parties than construction. He had been the college kid who showed up hungover on summer breaks, complained about the heat, and left early. But now, at 29, armed with an MBA his father had paid for, Tommy returned wearing crisp shirts and carrying a clipboard. He had ideas, reckless, flashy ideas. "We should outsource payroll, cut costs, and promise faster turnarounds," he announced in meetings, ignoring the fact that Daniel had already studied and rejected those ideas for good reasons. When Tommy contradicted Daniel's timeline in front of a major client, promising to finish a project in half the estimated time, the client walked away, citing concerns about unrealistic expectations. Daniel bit his tongue, trying to preserve the company's image, but Frank only smiled proudly at his son. "Fresh blood," Frank said, defending him. "We need new energy, Danny. You're too cautious these days." The words stung, especially after everything Daniel had built. The betrayal became undeniable at the company Christmas party. Daniel had been mingling with employees and longtime clients when he overheard Frank laughing with a group of investors. "Tommy's got new ideas, fresh energy," Frank said, raising a glass. "He's the future of this company." A client who had trusted Daniel for years protested, praising Daniel's reliability, but Frank dismissed it. "Tommy understands modern business practices in ways Danny never learned." The words felt like a knife. 12 years of loyalty, sacrifice, and dedication meant nothing compared to blood ties and an MBA. Weeks later, the final blow came. Frank called an all-hands meeting. Surrounded by workers Daniel had hired and trained, Frank announced Tommy as the new president and CEO of Donnelly Construction. Daniel would now handle permits, paperwork, and regulatory compliance, a desk job for a man who had built the company from the ground up. The room went silent. Daniel felt every eye on him, some full of pity, others shocked. Tommy approached afterward, grinning. "Hope you're ready to help me learn the ropes," he said smugly. Daniel forced a polite smile, but behind it, his mind was already moving. He had given Donnelly Construction 12 years of his life, and they had chosen to throw it away. Daniel Morrison had spent 12 years building Donnelly Construction with his bare hands and sheer determination. He had trusted Frank Donnelly's promise from the very beginning. "When the time is right, Danny, you'll get what you deserve," Frank had told him countless times, often after long days when Daniel was still at the office, reviewing blueprints or drafting proposals while everyone else had gone home. Daniel believed him, believed that hard work and loyalty would pay off. Though he kept pushing himself. He worked weekends, skipped family vacations, and turned down multiple offers from competing firms who wanted him as a project manager. Lisa, his wife, had often voiced what he refused to admit. "You've earned that partnership 10 times over," she would say as she poured him coffee before another 16-hour day. "Why hasn't Frank made it official?" Daniel's answer was always the same. I trust Frank. He's been good to me. When the time's right, it will happen. Lisa would nod, though she never looked convinced. To Daniel, loyalty meant something. He owed Frank for giving him a second chance when he had nothing, and he wasn't the kind of man who broke his word or left a mentor behind. But that loyalty would soon feel like a chain pulling him under. Tommy's arrival began the slow unraveling of everything Daniel had built. It started with small things, like renegotiating deals with trusted subcontractors to cut costs. Tommy bragged about saving a few $1,000s, ignoring the fact that those contractors had earned their reputation by doing reliable, high-quality work. Then he switched their project management software to a cheaper system that lacked the critical features Daniel had implemented years ago to keep their growing portfolio running smoothly. The final straw was the unrealistic promises Tommy made to clients. He boasted in meetings about cutting project timelines in half, insisting they could do it without compromising quality. Daniel knew it was impossible. Construction wasn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet. It was about precision, permits, weather delays, and coordination with dozens of subcontractors. Every time Tommy spoke, Daniel could feel the foundation of the business cracking. Longtime clients who had once trusted Donnelly Construction began questioning Daniel about missed deadlines and cost overruns, problems Tommy's decisions had created. He stayed quiet in meetings, trying to protect the company's reputation, but his silence felt like complicity. The company he had poured his life into was slipping through his fingers, and he couldn't stop it. When Daniel finally confronted Frank, hoping to make him see reason, the conversation went worse than he had imagined. It was late in the evening, the office nearly empty, when he stepped into Frank's office with a folder full of reports showing project delays and client complaints. "Frank, we need to talk about Tommy's decisions," Daniel said, laying the folder on his desk. Frank barely glanced at it. "Tommy's my son," he said firmly, his voice carrying a finality that Daniel hadn't heard before. "He has every right to learn this business." "He's not just learning, Frank," Daniel pushed, trying to stay calm. "He's making decisions that are costing us clients. The Morrison Center project walked because he overpromised a timeline that wasn't realistic. We can't keep doing this." Frank leaned back, his expression hardening. "You've grown too cautious, Danny. That's the problem. Success has made you conservative. Tommy brings fresh ideas, fresh energy. He's the future of this company." The words hit harder than Daniel expected. For 12 years, he had been told he was the backbone of Donnelly Construction, the reason clients trusted them, the man Frank depended on. Now, his years of loyalty were being dismissed as a liability. Daniel stood there for a long moment, the weight of Frank's words sinking in. For the first time, he realized that all the late nights, all the sacrifices, all the trust he had placed in Frank had meant nothing in the end. Loyalty, he understood now, wasn't a strength in this business. It was a chain that had kept him tied to a company that no longer valued him. For the first time in 12 years, Daniel began to wonder if it was time to walk away. Adrian Voss sat across the conference table, his sharp gaze fixed on Daniel as he flipped through the updated project timeline. The tension in the room was suffocating. "Daniel, I hired Donnelly Construction because of you," Voss said finally, his voice controlled but firm. "You've always delivered realistic timelines and quality work. But now I'm being told this project can be done 6 weeks faster with 15% cost savings. That doesn't sound like you. It sounds like someone desperate to win bids." Daniel opened his mouth to respond, but Tommy jumped in before he could speak. "Astrid, that's exactly why we're changing things," Tommy said, leaning forward with a practiced MBA grin. "We're streamlining operations, cutting inefficiencies, and modernizing our approach. This is the future of construction." Voss's expression didn't change. "Or you're cutting corners," he said flatly. "And I don't do business with contractors who gamble with my investments." Daniel tried to interject, but the damage was done. Voss closed the folder and pushed it toward Daniel. "Put this project on hold until you can guarantee the level of quality I signed up for." As Voss left the room, Daniel felt the last thread of trust snapping. Years of hard work were slipping away, and he was powerless to stop it. It wasn't just clients who were losing faith. The employees Daniel had trained and mentored for years were beginning to walk away. Miguel Santos, his most trusted foreman, knocked on Daniel's office door 2 days later, resignation letter in hand. "Danny, I can't do this anymore," Miguel said, his tone heavy with regret. "Tommy's changes to the Riverside project don't meet code. When I tried to explain, he told me I wasn't qualified to question his decision." Daniel looked at him, his stomach sinking. "He's not an engineer, Miguel." Miguel nodded grimly. "I know that, you know that, but he's the boss now. Martinez Construction offered me a supervisor position." better pay, less stress, and at least I won't be forced to cut corners that could get someone hurt. Daniel stared at the resignation letter, realizing it wasn't just Miguel he was losing. Miguel's departure would signal to the rest of the crew that the company was failing from the inside. Later that afternoon, Rebecca Chun stepped into his office, her expression tense. "Danny, morale's collapsing," she said quietly. "People are talking about leaving. They don't trust Tommy, and they don't think you can stop him. I'm not blaming you, but this place isn't what it used to be." Her words cut deeper than she realized. Donnelly Construction, once a place Daniel had been proud to build, was turning toxic before his eyes. The breaking point came the following week. Frank called Daniel into his office, his tone falsely cheerful. "Danny, you need to get on board with Tommy's vision," Frank said, sitting back in his chair. "This company is evolving, and we can't keep playing it safe. Clients want innovation, not caution." Daniel stared at him, unable to contain his frustration any longer. "Innovation?" he said sharply. "We're losing clients because Tommy doesn't understand what he's promising. He's cutting deals with untested subcontractors, changing specs that don't meet code, and making commitments we can't deliver. And you're letting him do it because he's your son." Frank's face darkened. "Tommy's family, Danny. He's the future of this company. Maybe you've just gotten too cautious to keep up." That was it. Daniel reached into his jacket, pulled out a folded letter, and placed it on Frank's desk. "You chose family over competence," he said quietly, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. Tommy, who had been lingering near the doorway, stepped in with a smug grin. "You're really quitting? Over what? Some hurt feelings? You'll never find another opportunity like this, Danny. You're just a glorified foreman." Daniel looked at him calmly, a small, almost relieved smile tugging at his lips. "You're right, Tommy," he said softly. "I'll never find another opportunity like this. Thank God." With that, he turned and walked out, leaving Frank and Tommy staring after him as the company he had built slipped further into chaos. Artie Voss sat across from Daniel at a quiet corner table in an upscale downtown restaurant, his sharp eyes studying Daniel with the same calculated precision he used for every business decision. "I'll be direct, Danny," Artie said, leaning forward slightly. "I didn't hire Donnelly Construction because of Frank or Tommy. I hired them because of you. Your reputation, your precision, your honesty. That's what I invested in. And frankly, it's the only reason I haven't pulled every remaining contract yet." Daniel kept his expression neutral, though the sting of Adrian's words wasn't aimed at him. "I'm not at Donnelly anymore," Daniel said simply. Adrian's smile widened slightly. "I know. That's why I asked you to meet me. I've been considering vertical integration, creating my own construction arm to handle future projects. But I need someone I can trust to run it. Someone who already has the respect of the crews, the subcontractors, and the clients. I want you to build it, Danny. I'll provide the capital and bonding. You'll be the majority owner, free to take other clients as well. We both win." Daniel stared at him for a long moment, weighing the offer. "Adrian, starting a company from scratch isn't a small risk," he said finally. "It's not charity, Danny," Adrian replied. "It's business. You have the talent, and I have the resources. Together, we can build something better than what Donnelly has become." Daniel felt something shift in him then, a spark he hadn't felt in months. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to smile. "Right, Adrian," he said, extending his hand. "Let's build something worth believing in." 3 weeks later, Morrison Construction officially opened its doors. The name wasn't for Daniel, but for his father, a carpenter who had taught him to measure twice and cut once. The office was modest, just a rented space 2 blocks from Donnelly Construction, but it hummed with energy from the start. Rebecca was the first to join him, walking into the new office with her project files tucked under one arm and a determined smile. "You're really doing this," she said, settling into her new desk. "We're doing this," Daniel corrected, handing her the first set of blueprints. Miguel came next, shaking Daniel's hand with a grin that carried relief. "I was waiting for this, Danny," he said, "and I brought 3 of my best guys with me. They're done wasting time over there." Word spread quickly through industry networks. Subcontractors began reaching out, eager to work under Daniel's leadership again. Within a month, Morrison Construction had its first official project, a small office building for Adrian Voss, designed specifically to establish the new company's reputation. Daniel was on site every day, walking the foundation with Miguel, double-checking every measurement. It felt right, like coming home to the kind of work that mattered. Meanwhile, Donnelly Construction was crumbling under Tommy's leadership. The Riverside project failed its inspection due to unauthorized changes Tommy had insisted on, requiring costly corrections that erased any profits. The downtown project, once their flagship, remained on indefinite hold as Adrian moved his contracts to Morrison Construction. Employees continued to resign, many of them quietly approaching Daniel for opportunity. By the end of the second month, Donnelly's once proud reputation was in tatters, its phone ringing with more complaints than new business. Frank showed up at Daniel's construction site one Thursday afternoon, looking older and more worn than Daniel had ever seen him. His shoulders sagged as he approached the trailer, and his voice carried no trace of the authority it once held. "Danny, we need to talk," Frank said, sitting down across from him. "The company's in trouble, real trouble. Tommy's trying, but it's not working. Maybe if you came back, helped him, taught him the way things should be done." Daniel set down the clipboard he'd been reviewing and looked Frank square in the eye. "You didn't make a mistake, Frank," he said evenly. "You made a choice. You chose family over competence. That's your right as an owner, but it's not my problem to solve." Frank's face tightened with regret, but he didn't argue. He stood slowly, giving Daniel a long, searching look before leaving without another word. Daniel watched him walk away, feeling no triumph, only a quiet certainty. He had made his choice too, and this time it was the right one. The headline hit the local business journals first thing on a Monday morning. Donnelly Construction Files for Chapter 11 Reorganization. The story spread quickly through the construction industry, whispered in job site trailers and discussed in developers' offices. Once regarded as a reliable name for quality commercial projects, Donnelly Construction had become a cautionary tale. The article detailed the company's financial collapse, projects stalled, major contracts canceled, and unpaid subcontractors lining up with lawsuits. The Riverside project, already infamous for failing inspections, had been shut down entirely. The downtown project, which once could have secured the company's future, was now firmly in the hands of Morrison Construction. For the crews who had once built their livelihoods under Daniel's leadership, the filing was confirmation of what they already knew. The old Donnelly was gone. Many of them had already jumped ship, quietly joining Morrison Construction over the past few months. Miguel had brought 3 of his best foremen, and Rebecca had recruited skilled project coordinators who trusted Daniel's leadership. These employees arrived at Morrison's new office with determination, grateful to work for a company where competence mattered more than family politics. "Feels good to be building something real again," Miguel remarked one morning as the crew gathered for a meeting. Daniel nodded but kept his emotions contained. This wasn't about gloating. It was about proving that good work still mattered. 2 days after the news broke, Frank Donnelly arrived unannounced at Daniel's office. He looked nothing like the proud, commanding man Daniel had once admired. His hair seemed grayer, his posture stooped, and his usual booming voice had softened to a weary tone. He sat down heavily across from Daniel, his hands clasped together, as though holding something fragile. "Danny," Frank began, his accent thicker than usual. "I can't watch this company die. I built it for 30 years. It's my life. Maybe if you came back, helped us rebuild, taught Tommy the right way." His voice cracked slightly, betraying the weight of his words. Daniel didn't look up from the plans on his desk for several seconds. When he did, his expression was calm but unyielding. "You didn't just let the company die, Frank," he said evenly. "You killed it the moment you chose blood over competence. You handed everything we built to someone who wasn't ready, and now you're asking me to fix it? The good ones have already landed on their feet. The people who cared about doing the work right. They're here now, building something worth believing." Frank's face tightened, shame flickering in his eyes. He nodded slowly, as if accepting a truth he'd been avoiding. "I thought I was doing what was right for my family," he said quietly. "I thought loyalty meant keeping it in the blood." Daniel's voice softened slightly, though there was no pity in his tone. "Loyalty means taking care of the people who build it with you, Frank. You forgot that, and now it's too late." Frank stood without another word, his shoulders slumping as he walked out, leaving behind the man who had once been his greatest asset. Tommy Donnelly, once full of arrogant promises and loud declarations about modernizing the industry, vanished almost overnight. Rumors spread that he had been removed quietly from what was left of Donnelly Construction, his reckless decisions finally too costly to ignore. Subcontractors who had once worked under his chaotic management refused his calls, and developers stopped returning his emails. Some said he had moved to another state, trying to leverage his MBA into a consulting job. Others believed he had left construction entirely, his name now synonymous with failure. Daniel heard the rumors in passing, but didn't care enough to confirm them. Tommy's silence was its own proof of what everyone already knew. The empire that Daniel had built had been handed to someone unworthy, and the fall had been inevitable. As Daniel stood later that evening, watching his crew finish another perfectly measured foundation, he felt no triumph over Frank or Tommy. What he felt was certainty. The work was strong, the foundation unshakable, and this time it was being built to last. 6 months after walking away from Donnelly Construction, Daniel Morrison stood in the middle of a new construction site, watching his crew work with the precision and pride he had always valued. Morrison Construction was thriving in ways even he hadn't fully anticipated. With more than $8 million in active contracts and a growing list of high-profile clients, the company had quickly become one of the most respected firms in the region. Developers praised the quality of the work, city inspectors commended the clean, well-managed sites, and subcontractors, many of whom had followed Daniel from Donnelly, spoke openly about finally working for a company where competence and integrity mattered more than politics. Every project bore Daniel's personal touch. He was on site almost every day, reviewing plans, walking the foundation, and checking details that most owners would leave to project managers. His presence reassured clients and motivated employees. Rebecca often teased him about being too hands-on, but Daniel believed consistency built trust, and trust was the reason Morrison Construction was growing so quickly. Former clients of Donnelly Construction were among the first to notice the difference. Adrian Voss, who had taken a chance on Donnelly when Morrison Construction was little more than an idea, now referred to him as the most reliable builder he had ever worked with. "You deliver what you promise," Voss said during a meeting, and in this industry, that's worth more than anything else. Word of mouth spread quickly. Developers who had once worked with Donnelly now called Daniel directly, asking for bids and offering contracts without hesitation. One even admitted that the decision to move projects to Morrison Construction was about more than quality or cost. "You care about the work," he said, "and that shows in every detail." Those words meant more to Daniel than the contracts themselves. For years, he had poured himself into building someone else's company, only to be cast aside for a son who hadn't earned the trust of his crew or his clients. Now, every compliment, every new project, and every satisfied client felt like quiet redemption. Inside the office, Morrison Construction's growing reputation was reflected in the atmosphere. Rebecca managed operations with precision. Miguel oversaw multiple crews without sacrifice safety or quality, and younger employees often commented on how much they were learning under Daniel's leadership. There were long days and the pressure of expansion, but there was also pride. At the end of every week, Daniel would stand by the window of his new office, watching his crew return from the field with tired but satisfied expressions. It reminded him why he had started this new chapter, not for revenge, but to build something he could be proud of. When asked by a local business journalist about Donnelly Construction's bankruptcy, Daniel's response was simple and direct. "We built something better," he said calmly, "and that's enough." He meant it. There was no satisfaction in Frank's regret or Tommy's silence, only a quiet certainty that he had chosen the right path. The foundation he stood on now was stronger than any he had ever poured because it was built on competence, respect, and trust, values no one could take away from him again. The sun was low on the horizon, casting long golden streaks across the half-finished steel frame of Morrison Construction's latest project. Daniel Morrison stood at the edge of the site, his boots resting on packed dirt, watching his crew move with practiced efficiency. The hum of equipment, the sharp ring of hammers against steel, and the steady rhythm of voices calling out measurements all blended into a sound he had come to love. It was the sound of progress, of something built with care and skill. For a moment, Daniel let himself breathe it in, feeling a quiet sense of satisfaction settle over him. He thought back to the 12 years he had given to Donnelly Construction, the long nights, the sacrifices, the moments when he believed loyalty would be enough to secure a future. Strangely, he felt no bitterness now. Frank had betrayed his trust, and Tommy's arrogance had nearly destroyed everything Daniel had worked for. But without that betrayal, he might never have stepped out on his own. What he had now was more than just a business. It was proof that hard work and integrity still mattered, and that was worth more than any title Frank could have offered him. Rebecca walked up beside him, holding a clipboard and brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. "The inspections passed without a single issue," she reported, smiling. "The crew's ahead of schedule by almost a week. Adrian is going to be thrilled." Daniel nodded, his eyes still fixed on the structure rising before them. "This is how it's supposed to be done," he said quietly. "No shortcuts, no empty promises, just good work done by people who care about it." Rebecca tilted her head, studying him. "Do you ever wish things had gone differently with Frank?" Daniel paused before answering. "No," he said finally. "I wish it hadn't ended the way it did, but if it hadn't, I wouldn't be standing here. The most important foundation you can build is the one you stand on when you choose to start over. This is mine." Rebecca's smile widened, and for a moment she looked younger, like the eager project coordinator he had hired years ago. "Then I'd say we're building on solid ground," she replied before heading back to check on the crew. That evening, Daniel sat on the back porch of his home with Lisa, a glass of scotch in his hand. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of fresh-cut lumber from a nearby site. Lisa leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "You've come a long way in 6 months," she said softly. Daniel let out a quiet laugh. "Frank taught me one thing," he said, staring out at the fading light. "If you work hard, you'll go places." He just didn't realize sometimes you have to leave to get there. Lisa smiled, squeezing his hand. Daniel raised his glass slightly, not in a toast to revenge or even success, but to the quiet certainty that what they were building now would last. Not just the structures, but the trust and respect that had built them.